Hey, I'm Andy. If you don't know me, it's probably because I'm not famous. But I did start a men's grooming company called Harry's. The idea for Harry's came out of a frustrating experience I had buying razor blades. Most brands were overpriced, overdesigned, and out of touch. At Harry's, our approach is simple. Here's our secret. We make sharp, durable blades and sell them at honest prices for as low as $2 each. We care about quality so much that we do some crazy things, like buy a world-class German blade factory. Obsessing over every detail means we're confident in offering a 100% quality guarantee. Millions of guys have already made the switch to Harry's, so thank you if you're one of them. And if you're not, we hope you give us a try with this special offer. Get a Harry starter set with a 5-blade razor, weighted handle, shave gel, and a travel cover, all for just $3 plus free shipping. Just go to harrys.com and enter code FACE at checkout. That's harrys.com, code FACE. Enjoy!
This is
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to have with us the chief economist at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Chad Stone. We did not have an opportunity, Chad and I, to chat when the jobs report first came out for the month of February, because as many of you know, I was on the road on the march from Selma to Montgomery, Lord have mercy. But Chad has been patient, and so we are now going to keep our regular date to talk jobs report. Chad, how are you, man?
I'm well, Mark. How are you?
I'm just fine. It's good to see you as always. So if we're looking at February, February was another good month, was it not?
February was a very good month with 678,000 jobs created and an additional 92,000 jobs added in revisions to the previous 2 months. So that's over 700,000 addition to the job figure since February 2020 to the jobs figure in the expansion. And we're still 2.1 million jobs short of where we were in February 2020. So there's still some room to keep adding jobs, but February is really great. And the unemployment rate went down to 3.8%. And that was accompanied by a tiny uptick, which is a good thing in labor force participation, people who are either actively looking for a job or actually employed. And the share of the population with a job ticked up a couple of tenths. So all good indicators.
So it looks like this thing, we're really climbing out of this thing more consistently. I know we've seen a few ups and downs, but it would seem now that this may be a more steady rebound, correct?
One hopes.
Yeah.
And of course, the situation is clouded by world developments and by inflation, but the job growth is still looking good. Yes,
folks. My cheat sheet, as should be yours. Chad has an epic thread every Friday in the beginning of the month when the jobs report comes out at Chad CBPP on his Twitter. You mentioned that relief policies played a big role in the jobs recovery. Explain.
That's right. So there's a chart that I always put in that shows the path of employment growth from February 2020 and the big drop from February to April 2020, which was the COVID recession, and then the climb out partially, and then the continuing climb out to the point where we're now only 2.1 million jobs below where we were in February, whereas we were 22 million or something like that below in April of 2020. And what I've added to the chart is an indication of when relief actions were taken, starting with the CARES Act and some other measures in 2020, which provided a lot of relief and stimulus to the economy, and going through the American Rescue Plan at the beginning of 2021. And without those policies, which both helped people survive economically, but also provided stimulus to the economy to get the recovery much faster than was expected at the time. When COVID first hit and the economy first took a nosedive, there were pretty dire predictions about what was going to happen, and we actually came back much faster. And starting with the CARES Act in March, at the end of March in 2020, the government really stepped up.
Also, of course, you and I talk about the unemployment rates by race and ethnicity. The chart is telling that you have included, and yes, of course, he's right. Center on Budget and Chad always have great charts as well, folks. I've been saying for years I need to put them on T-shirts. They'd really be marketable then. But obviously, we're still. I'm looking at the chart. Sometimes a chart is more of a visual aid than actually looking at the numbers. The darker blue indicates February 2022. The lighter blue indicates February 2020. And in every race and ethnicity, the unemployment rate is slightly higher still. But the highest of all, unfortunately, continues to be African Americans. Actually, it looks like the Hispanic numbers are close to even, it would seem,
Right.
Which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's still the number for the Asian community still higher than it was in 2020. So to be specific, February 2020 for the Hispanic population, 4.4% unemployment. February 2022 for the Hispanic population, 4.4%. For the Asian population, February 2020, 2.5%. February 2022 for the Asian population, 3.1%. For the white population, 3.0% February 2020. For the white population, February 2022, 3.3%. And for African Americans, February 2020, 6%. February 2022, 6.6%. You see the biggest difference in the African American community. Although what Chad also points out, everyone is a bit lower than they were in January of 2022. But still, it's only the Hispanic population that's become even with a year ago.
Yeah, that's right. There was some improvement in everybody's unemployment rate from January to February of this year, but you went through the statistics, and of course the thing that stands out, as it always does, is the Black unemployment rate, which historically was at a very low level in February 2020, and is closing in on, but not yet back to that level. But it's twice the white unemployment rate, and that's a historical pattern that's held in the data that we have. I mean, what I say when we don't have the time series all in front of us, but if there's ups and downs and recessions and recoveries, and historically the Black unemployment rate in the best of times is barely better than the white unemployment in the worst of times.
Yeah.
And on average, the Black unemployment rate is twice as high as the white.
Yeah. More MIP after this message.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save money on your insurance? Of course you would. After all, who wouldn't love a great deal, right? And when it comes to great rates on insurance for all of the things in your life, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners, condo, or renters coverage. You could save even more with a special discount when you bundle your coverages. Plus, add the easy-to-use Geico mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more. And choosing to switch to Geico becomes an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save with great rates and discounts. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com to get a rate quote or contact your local agent and get started seeing how much you could save.
Let's talk about part-time workers. The number of people working part-time involuntarily is going down as well, if I'm understanding that correctly.
It's going down, and in fact, it's better. It's lower than it was in before the recession, before the pandemic. So that's not. Unemployment rates can be complicated because they don't take into account people who've dropped out of the labor force, and there is some of that. But looking at the statistic, how many people are not getting as many hours as they would like, it's actually somewhat better in February of 2022 than it was in February of 2020, just before the recession.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting. You touched on this earlier, but just to be clear, people who want a job but are not counted as unemployed because they've not looked in the last 4 weeks, are more people back out there looking now? Is that number changing?
That number has improved somewhat, but there's this phenomenon that people are calling the Great Resignation of people having left their jobs and quit their jobs. In many cases, that's to take a better job, but in some cases, it's to be out of the labor force, not officially unemployed, perhaps because they're expecting that if they have the financial resources maybe to wait a little while before coming back in, or maybe they've retired a little bit early, but they might come back as the market continues. Some of them will come back as the market strengthens. But for now, there's that phenomenon of people who've quit their jobs, sometimes to take another job that's better, sometimes to search, and sometimes to just be out of the labor force for a while, maybe taking care of home responsibilities or something like that.
How did we do in February on state and local? And of course, folks, we always talk about how education affects state and local. What happened this February?
So there was a modest gain in state and local employment in February, but the big picture is that state and local government is still down. I have to look at my cheat sheet if I can find it. Anyway, they're down 500. No, I'm sorry, they're down several 100,000, and education jobs are almost half of the deficit.
You almost need a whole nother school year cycle probably to correct that. If we were to presume that everything would be absolutely back to normal this coming fall, that might be made up. But I mean, Chad and I don't make predictions, folks, because we just don't know what's going to happen and whatnot. So, but we know that's real. We just want to go back to race and ethnicity, though. I left this out because you and I have also been talking about the disproportionate number of job losses that have befallen Black women, and that still seems to be the case. Overall, women have done worse than men in all groups, but we're still looking at Black women having lost a greater percentage of the jobs, correct?
That's right. We talked about how overall there was this sharp drop in payroll employment and then a recovery, and we're still not back. But if we break that down by race and gender, for workers 20 years old and above, leaving out the very younger groups, Black women and Hispanic women were in jobs that took the hardest hit in the recession, leisure and hospitality industry, for example, or notably. And although jobs have recovered for everybody, if you looked at the path for men over time, in men versus women or men versus women within at racial or ethnic groups, women always have larger percentage job losses than men, and that's still the case now, even as we're closing in on full employment. And Black women have had the worst experience relative to everyone else.
More MIP after this message. Chad also talks to us about, he writes to us, and if you can follow his thread at Chad CBPP, 2 Ps, employment population ratios by race, ethnicity, 80% of the, look at these, so 2020, a year ago, February, we're talking about February 2020, folks, 81% of the white population, 81.5% with a job, 80.4 now. For the Black population, 75.9% in 2020, 74.9% in 2022, 78% for the Hispanic population, 76.9% for the Hispanic population now. Asian in 2020, 78.2%, 78.7% now. The African-American population still falling much lower. Also, education, unequal education opportunities. The number of employed workers, Chad tells us, folks, with a bachelor's degree is above the February 2020 level, but those with less than a bachelor's still remain lower than anyone. And so that continues to be an issue, educational opportunities. So again, we'll just have to see where this is headed, how consistent this will be. But since even the jobs report, talk to us about inflation. You've looked at that.
Yeah. So inflation is the salient issue of the day now, these days, it came out of, it kind of came out of the blue about a year ago, and at the time we thought it was a transient phenomenon, that it had to do with temporary supply chain disruptions and things like that, but the problems have continued, the kinds of things that are raising prices. And the latest is, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which affects energy prices and affects food prices, because Ukraine's a major wheat grower, and Russia's the major energy supplier, and appropriately there's a boycott on. But that means that food and energy prices are up substantially, and overall inflation is up substantially. The Federal Reserve just on Wednesday took the first step towards starting to raise interest rates to try to combat inflation, and they're trying to manage the delicate task of combating inflation without throwing the economy into a recession. In other words, to keep unemployment, to keep strong employment growth and unemployment low, while trying to bring down inflation. It's a challenging task, but they're on the case.
So, Chad, you must be mistaken. Fox News tells us the inflation is all Joe Biden's fault. It can't be Putin's fault. Are you sure you have your information right?
That sounds like a political question, and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities is not a.
Obviously, yeah, I know. I'm just messing with you. But I don't want to just gloss over that. I want let's help people understand a little bit more. So we know there was, and you and I discussed this before, but I just want to keep people educated. We saw inflation go up before the war, before the invasion. We saw inflation affect prices. We talked about supply chain. Talk to us about how this conflict worsens it. And you mentioned gas prices, but also food. So a lot of people may not make the connection between the conflict in Russia and food, the price of food going up. So can you kind of walk us through that?
Yes, and this affects food prices and food availability globally. Ukraine is one of the major wheat suppliers to the world, and wheat is a critical component in food, and it's just the supply's been largely seriously disrupted, largely cut off by the war. And so that will feed into the food prices, and it's not just gas prices; it's energy prices in general, home heating and things like that. And that's because oil prices are set in world markets, and there's an interruption of supply from that's going on because of the war. That adds to some stresses that were there anyway from good causes. The economy's recovery has been really strong, and that's a good thing. But that brings the gap between what the economy can supply and what aggregate demand is, that has demand pushing up against supply because we've had such a good recovery. So if you had to do it over again, you wouldn't want to not have enacted the policies that brought about the strong recovery. A lot of things are coming together to keep this inflation thing going, but you can't rerun history. But our policy steps that got unemployment really down and got the economy really back running were really important. And there is inflation. Some of the inflation arises from that, but a lot of it arises from more difficult issues like the supply chains. I forgot to mention one more thing, which is the spread of COVID, the new spread of COVID in China, which has led them to shut down cities and shut down production. Yeah. And they're major suppliers of intermediate goods into the production of, and some final goods. And so the fact that there's an interruption in Chinese production is a supply chain issue that feeds into inflation.
I know I said we don't really do forecasts, but I know sometimes you all as economists have to look at things. What would be the long-term effect of this conflict in Ukraine on inflation and upon the economy? I mean, are we looking at something that really could cause even bigger problems if it endures, if it lasts longer?
Okay, that's a tough thing to make any forecast about, because nobody has any good forecast about what's what the progress of this war is going to be and how it's going to be resolved. But I would say that the expectation is for inflation to ease slightly later in the year, but not in coming months, assuming awful things don't happen. So as you say, hesitate to make someone who tells you what's going to happen is someone that you don't want to listen to, because it's in this situation, because it's just too complicated.
But the other thing too, Chad, lastly, and this would be the absolute worst case scenario, if the United States were to get more involved in conflict or actually enter the conflict, and then we would be at a technically a World War III scenario. But there's always been this statement that has been made for decades that war helps the economy. I've heard people say that all the time. So I ask you to put on your historical lens. Has that always been historically true? I guess maybe during the Second World War, there was, production and jobs created. But from an economist point of view, that's not necessarily a factual statement, is it? That if there's a war, that actually improves the economy?
No. Now you harken back to World War II, and we were still coming out of the Depression, and there was still a lot of economic slack in the economy, and so the ramping up of production made some contribution. So there's some economic analysis suggesting that the war did have a positive impact, but we're very close to full employment right now. And when you're very close to full employment and you add additional demand, then the more of it goes into prices than into expanding output if you're already operating at almost full capacity. So it's a statement that gets made too easily, that wars are always good for the economy, because they can be bad. I mean, they're bad, period. But but they're not necessarily good for the economy. But there was the World War II experience when we were still coming out of the Depression.
Yes, sir. Chad Stone, Chief Economist, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, our dear friend. We've been doing this every month. I'm a little off. It's my fault. I was a little off this month because we were down marching, but we didn't want to. Well, thank you. We still always want to hear from Chad and get it in so we can keep all of you and our loyal audience and around the world informed about the latest numbers from this expert and veteran economist, Chad Stone. As always, buddy, thank you.
You're very welcome. Always good to be here.
Yes, sir. Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Get ahead of postage rate increases this year with Stamps.com. It's like your own personal post office. Sign up with promo code PROGRAM for a 4-week trial plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. That's Stamps.com, code PROGRAM.